I'm so excited about this session. It's a topic that is, I think, completely new from any of the other philanthropy conferences that I've gone to. The journey after trauma, and I love the theme of this conference being donor journeys because they are all so unique. Many of our journeys start with a family legacy and the story of struggle, and some have a passion that was born out of great tragedy. And today you'll hear from these lovely three women that I love the last panel too. I wrote down some notes about philanthropy because it was a great example of all the different ways that we engage in philanthropy. So of course it's giving money, but it's also galvanizing community. It's using influence and volunteering, participating in giving circles, organizing a community. And you'll hear much of that in these stories as well. And it's going to be an emotional journey here today. So you were well prepared in the first panel, but you'll hear stories of resilience and healing and of course trauma from abuse, devastating hurricane, and gun violence. The way this panel is going to go is each of these three ladies will have 10 minutes to share their story. Their bios are in the program, so I'm not going to go over that. After that 10 minutes, we'll have a conversation up here around some of the themes that develop, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. And so please jot down your questions as they come up and really look forward to hearing them when we get to the audience Q&A. We'll have plenty of time for that. So let me begin. I will begin by introducing, we're starting with Heidi or Polo? Let's see. Heidi. So Heidi Yewman is here with us straight from not Sundance, but just around the corner, Slam Dance, premiering her film, Behind the Bullet. And so, Heidi, please jump in and share your story.
Great, thank you. My journey began just around 20 years ago. I graduated from Columbine High School, and I graduated 13 years before that massacre. Dave Sanders, the teacher that died, had been my basketball coach, my typing teacher, and a mentor. And I remember going back to his funeral and sitting and looking at the teachers, my former teachers, with swollen red eyes. And something inside of me snapped. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I can't believe this is happening. And I wanted to get involved. And I wanted to get involved in providing solutions and stopping this kind of horrible thing from happening. And so I got involved in activism with the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence, and I did stuff at the local level. I organized rallies, I did protests, I testified at my state house up in Washington State, and I organized vigils. And throughout this process, I became very aware of the statistics that were constantly being thrown around, and I got really frustrated by that. Because if 32,685 people die, there's somebody out there that wishes it was 84. It's that one. So I became very curious about the stories, and I wanted to explore, really the question was, how do you get out of bed the day after you find out your son's been murdered, or your husband's killed himself, or your daughter's found a gun and shot somebody, or shot themselves? How do you move forward? And so I started asking people, and I ended up writing a book called Beyond the Bullet, and it's the stories of 19 people who've been impacted by gun violence. So they were either shot and survived, or they lost a loved one to gun violence. And I asked them, how do you move forward after the worst day of your life? And through this process, I've learned a lot about myself over the last 20 years. It'll be 20 years this April. And what I learned was when I'm scared of things, I like to go towards them. I know that's sort of weird, and my children make fun of me about this. If I can examine something and really look at it and explore it, then it becomes less scary to me. And so trauma was one of those things that I really wanted to explore and not be so scared about it. So I found this organization in Portland, where I live, Portland, Oregon, called Trauma Intervention Program. And what they do is a group of volunteers, there's about 200 of them in the area, and they go and they, alongside firefighters and police, and what they do is they provide emotional first aid while the cops are doing the investigating. So when there's a trauma, like a car accident, somebody fell off a cliff, somebody drowned, a fire, a big car accident, and even a natural death. So oftentimes, as volunteers, we will go and sit with a woman, an 80-year-old woman whose husband just died. The police came and said, this is a natural death, so we are going to go and do our police stuff elsewhere. If we weren't there, she would sit with her dead husband's body until the mortuary came to get him. And so I feel so honored to be able to sit with that woman and wait with her until her support system gets there. Often kids live out of state, that kind of thing. And I remember one specific incident where a man shot his wife and then he killed himself. And then a few hours later, their 6-year-old daughter got off the school bus, went home, and found them. And my job that day was to sit with her at the neighbor's home while the cops were investigating what happened. And then I had to go into the home to get her stuff for her and protect her from that. And so I tend to sort of jump into that. I haven't figured out how to deal with trauma, but it helps me process things. And then I found myself doing a protest to Starbucks. They were allowing people to openly carry firearms in their stores, and I had an issue with this. I didn't like to go get coffee with people with guns on their hips, and so I did a protest. And I was doing this protest, and all these guys were standing in front of me, yelling at me with guns on their hip, and I thought, wow, like, what's that feel like to have a gun and carry it with you all the time? So I wrote a 4-part series called My Month with a Gun. And that's where I discovered that at night, when I did this for Ms. Magazine, and I discovered that when you're sleeping, going to bed at night and thinking, oh, I need to pay the bill and I need to help my son with his science project, I laid there thinking, okay, so if a guy comes into our house and I shoot him, and I'll get to the gun, I'll shoot him, and then he'll die, and then how do I protect my son from seeing that? And so I was exploring this idea. Around this time, my husband, his business was doing really well, and this is where I get into the philanthropy. His business was doing really well. I had joined the board of Brady Campaign. I had joined the TIP board. And we were starting to have some money and wanted to decide how do we be strategic about sending it out and where do we spend or where do we give this money out to help the world. And I found this organization called Women Donors Network, and I'm on the board of it right now. It's a great organization, women across the country who collectively give to create more power in their giving. And so I told my husband, I said, we need a strategy. We came up with a strategy. We said, let's give 10% of our income to organizations. And we said, let's do 1/3 to TIP, 1/3 to Brady, and 1/3 to WDN. Super, we're gonna have this great plan that's gonna be awesome. So it was working well until Trump came into all of our lives. And what happened was my husband likes to write angry checks. That's what he does. That's his thing. And so I said, okay, Dave, he's here, back here. I'm going to throw him under the bus a little bit. So Trump goes on, he calls Hillary Clinton a nasty woman. Do you guys all remember that, right? So I said, we have this plan. And he said, I'm really angry. And he goes in his office, he writes a check. And then a week later, this arrives in the mail.
That's great.
Right? So I said, Dave, no, come on, we have this plan. Remember the 10%, and we're going to do a third, a third, a third. He said, oh, that's right. Okay, sorry. Yes, I won't do that anymore. So he said, okay, great. So he, then what happens is Kansas basically shuts down all abortion clinics. So he gets angry, goes in his office, writes a check. A week later, this arrives in the mail. Come on, Dave, seriously, this plan, remember the plan? He said, oh, yeah, right. I said, just give me a check and I'll send it to WDN and they'll do the stuff on the ground, the Women Donors Network. Okay, I promise I will do that. So what happens, I'm not there. Trump talks about the Muslim ban and talks about bad hombres, right? So here we are.
Oh my gosh.
A week later. So we're still working on it. He's doing better. Yeah, we've had some therapy over it. So that's our process for giving. And so we give philanthropy through the organizations I'm on. I'm on the board of WDN now and love that organization. I encourage you to look at it if that's something you're interested in. So what am I doing now? Again, I lean into the things that scare me. I wanted to write another book, and I decided that I wanted to find out, what does it mean when you're the good guy with a gun and you shoot and kill somebody? What does that do to you? Surely you don't do that. Someone breaks into your house, you kill them, the cops don't arrest you because you live in Florida and you make my day law, right? Or stand my ground. And so I started interviewing 4 people. And I have this film out now called Behind the Bullet. And it's a 8-year-old who shot and killed his little brother, who was 5. He's now 18. And I interviewed him about his story and how does his family deal with that. I interviewed a guy in Washington State who shot an intruder that was in his house, ironically stealing his guns. But he's paranoid now. He can't sleep. He has neighbors who say, hey, Kevin, did you kill anybody today? And so he's the NRA's poster child, but there's a consequence. There's a moral injury that happens. And I interviewed a woman who attempted suicide, and now she spends 5 years reconstructing her face. And then a man in Philadelphia who got in a street fight and shot somebody and spent 10 years in prison. So these stories are just so impactful to me, and I love exploring these and looking for different ways to talk about gun violence that isn't the normal pro-gun, anti-gun, good guy, bad guy with the gun. And I'm having success with it. So I feel like I've worked through a lot of the trauma that I have seen and that we all continue to see, like Parkland. And I'm grateful to be here and share my story with you, and would love to talk with any of you who are interested in this issue.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heidi. Great. So Lee Ippolito Jurewitz, I got that right. Lee comes from a family foundation in Galveston, Texas, and really has the perspective of the community going through a trauma and coming together to heal. So please share your story, Heidi.
Hi, everybody. So hurricanes. You guys, I know a lot of you in the room are from Florida and so you're familiar with hurricanes, and we just had a big one. And Galveston, Texas, where I grew up, and I'm several generations in, 6 generations on one side, 3 on the other. We have the, I guess, dubious distinction of having the largest natural disaster in terms of human life lost in the 1900 storm, which was a huge hurricane and basically almost completely wiped out the town. Several family members on my mom's side were killed. But they stayed. They stayed and they rebuilt, and it's this great little thriving community near Houston now. But then in 2008, Hurricane Ike hit, and that was a big one. They're still rebuilding from Ike. It's sort of our Katrina. Not quite as bad. We were a little more resilient than New Orleans was, but at that point, the family foundations in town, which our foundation wasn't really set up until 2012, so we weren't involved at this point. However, my grandfather and my aunt lived on the island and were impacted, but Galveston's an island, by the way. It's a barrier island. The community really picked itself up by the bootstraps, and all the foundations formed what's called the Galveston County Recovery Fund. And everybody put money in there, all the donors, and they gave money to people to do things such as muck out their house and purchase drywall and rebuild and things like that. And after a couple of years after Hurricane Ike, which was in 2008, that went dormant. It's in the memorandum of understanding that we all have. It went dormant, and then August 2017 was Hurricane Harvey, and within days, that fund was up and running again. And all the foundations, and this time we were invited to participate, all the foundations in town immediately gave money, and we started having meetings, I think the week after Harvey. Fortunately, with Harvey, the island of Galveston itself there was a little bit of flooding, but we didn't really get the majority of it. It was up on the mainland, south of Houston, which is still part of Galveston County. And so ever since then, we've been meeting quite frequently and giving money to individuals, to organizations, and things like that to rebuild those areas that were completely flooded. One of our she's a voting member of the Galveston County Recovery Fund. Her home in Houston was completely flooded out, and she had to move out for 6 months and everything. So I personally know several friends that are still, some of them are still not back in their homes, or they were able to move back, but they don't have any furniture yet, and things like that. And that was almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. So it's just interesting to see. Now we're starting to talk about, we're less in the rebuilding and financing rebuilding, and we're more in the resilience conversation and how we can build this city and the county to handle these hurricanes when they happen again, because they will. And apparently, because of global warming, the hurricanes are getting more powerful and there's more storm surge. So those are going to be issues that if you live in a place like Florida or on a barrier island on any of these coasts, you're going to have to deal with. And so we're now sort of switching the conversation and talking about how do we fund resilience? What do we do in these years when we don't have an issue, a disaster to respond to? What do we do to help the response when a disaster does happen and prepare people for things? And it's just interesting. It's one of those things where prior to Hurricane Ike in particular, the family foundations in town didn't really work together. And it was sort of after that they kind of said, well, you know what, we need to work together and do this funding and get these buildings rebuilt and get the trash out of here. And Galveston at the time had these beautiful 100-year-old oak trees, and they all died. And it completely changed the look and the feel of this cute little town that had its heyday in Victorian times. It was all these cute little Victorian houses and these beautiful oak trees, and the majority of them, I think 90% of them, died because they sat in salt water for about a week. And since replanted, but they had to replant mature oak trees to try to get that feel back, and it's getting there. But I remember walking into my parents had moved to Austin in the meantime, and I remember 2 months after Hurricane Ike walking into the house that we had owned, the house that I grew up in. It was owned by somebody else, and nobody lived there at the time. But I walked into that house where I had lived for 15 years and went to high school there, and my sisters were born in that house. You know, I mean, this house had a lot of family meaning to us, and it was open. Nobody was living there, and the water line was about 9 feet up. I mean, it was way up the wall, and I just stood there crying. And it wasn't even my house anymore. I hadn't lived there in 15 years, but and at the time I was in my 30s, and someone said earlier, I was in that, did not have any disposable income or time to give back. So then after Hurricane Harvey happened, not only were we involved and had a family foundation and could be involved in giving money, but I was in a better place personally, and I literally packed up a suitcase with a friend of mine who was flying to Dallas like 2 days later and sent clothes and everything, and there were lots of charities that were bringing stuff down to the Houston area. So she took that and like 3 other suitcases with her. I sent stuff via Amazon. The diaper bank has, you know, everybody has wish lists on Amazon now, which is awesome. And so you can more easily get things to the people that need them on the ground. And that was really important to me. I had friends drive in from Mississippi and Oklahoma. I had sent them stuff on Amazon, like shovels and trash bags and gloves, and they put it all in the back of their truck and drove on down and helped people actually muck out their houses. So even though I couldn't be there, I live in California, I couldn't be there at that juncture right then in the immediate thing, I was able to take steps, and then have been participating with the Galveston County Recovery Fund ever since. And honestly had to talk my family into giving more money to the recovery fund. They didn't want to fund more than we originally did, and I got a little bit more money out of them. That's sort of our story. It's a great testament to the foundations in Galveston about collaboration and teaming up and helping those who are less fortunate and who just don't have the resources. And we fund everything from buying tools to giving to faith-based organizations that actually have the people that go into these homes and help these people rebuild. We'll give to individuals. There is one organization that sort of goes around and buys up furniture really cheap and then gives it to people that need new furniture. We gave her some money. We do a lot of funding. A big chunk of the recovery fund's money, I think it's 30%, has to go to case management, so case workers, to help these people get the resources they need. And that goes from, whether it is a place to live temporarily or mental health counseling. When you're living on the second floor while the entire first floor of your home is completely flooded and all of your belongings are literally flowing out the door and down the street, it's a hard road, and a lot of marriages suffer for it, and they really need mental health treatment, and that is usually one of the forgotten pieces. So we try to fund some of those things, and that's really our story.
Thank you. And Polo, please tell us about your journey.
Sure. My name is Polo Rio Tate, and I was born and raised in East Lansing, Michigan, a town that my family has deep ties to the community. My great-great-grandfather was automotive pioneer Ransom Eli Olds, a beautiful, inventive mind and a progressive spirit, and a giant philanthropist. He invented such things as the assembly line and the internal combustion engine, and REO Speedwagon, not the band, but the name. And of course, the automobile that was his namesake, the Oldsmobile. And I was born and raised in that philanthropic family with a philanthropic spirit. I was a driven child, a rough and tumble exterior with sort of a creative heart, and deeply into athletics, an athlete to the core, team sport oriented. Thankfully, I was born into the right family where the notion that you can be, do, or have anything that you desire in this world if you're willing to set your mind to it and to work for it was deeply ingrained. And I took that and I ran with it. My dream was to work for the FBI as a profiler. I love people and I love figuring out and hearing what makes them tick and why they choose to make the decisions that they do, and truly to get inside somebody's mind and heart and see how the two are connected. And in wanting to accept that challenge and in being so team sport oriented, I, of course, at the age of 11, pressed my dream into a pair of metal dog tags that I wanted to be in the Air Force someday. My grandfather had planes and my mom flew solo when she was 16. And I wanted to be a part of the greatest team in the nation with the mission of protecting our country and the greater mindedness to go beyond yourself and to contribute to the ultimate team. And so that's what I did. I kept a 4.0 GPA all through high school, had no life. Was part of the National Honor Society. I had earned a senatorial nomination to both West Point and the Air Force Academy and played 3 varsity sports all 4 years of high school, was completely driven to earn what I finally did, which was an appointment and an NCAA Division I volleyball scholarship to the United States Air Force Academy. And so I showed up in Colorado Springs, Colorado at the pinnacle of my dream, rip-roaring, ready to go for basic training. And it was incredible. Basic training started, and I saw things that I had never seen, and I did things that I'd never done. And the volleyball season started, and here was my first collegiate season playing Division I volleyball, something that I had worked so hard for my entire life. And then the school year started, and it was amazing until it wasn't. And I met some people that were not so great. I had experiences that were devastating. And shortly into my freshman year, my dually year, which is the 4-degree year at the Air Force Academy, I was sexually assaulted twice by 2 different people, one of whom was surprising, somebody that you would not think to protect yourself against. Actually, a very dear friend of mine, or what I thought. And the second one happened brutal, violently sexually assaulted to silence me, not to say a word. And this happening my freshman year, of course, arrested any development that I had as a cadet. And things got so bad eventually with me wanting to keep my mouth shut and just go to school and just do what I had sat there and gone there to do, that in a PTSD dissociative tremor, I told one of my teammates about the first assault. And in doing so, I essentially pulled the pin on the grenade that was going to blow up my life at USAFA, that was going to stop my volleyball career, and that was going to put me in mortal danger just staying at the Air Force Academy. There were hazing rituals, and I was shunned and silenced by both my compatriots and my classmates and also superiors there. And so when I was trying to put the pieces of my life back together, eventually I ended up having to leave the Air Force Academy and being forced to leave, even though I tried mightily to pull myself up by my bootstraps and move on and get over it and to stay and do my job. Unfortunately, I was forced to leave the Air Force Academy, and I was putting the pieces of my life back together, trying to make sense of what had happened, what I didn't mention to you was that at the age of 7, my sister was killed in a horseback riding accident. And my family went from being a family of 4 to a family of 3. And it irrevocably changed our life trajectory in that moment. And yet I watched my mom, who is here today, who is one of the strongest, most amazing women I know, get up every day after losing her firstborn daughter and breathe life into her memory and the memory of her incandescent spirit. And I watched her put things together in our community like a writing award in my sister's name. I watched her create from nothing a center where siblings can go who have lost siblings and families can go who have lost families and get counseling and therapy. I watched as she took me to the East Lansing Public Library and set up a children's section in my sister's name and truly moved through horrific grief to take her passion of children and turn it into a purpose that was greater than herself. This was my upbringing, so that I knew when I left the Air Force Academy and I took a solid year to really just heal and make sense of my life, I knew that when I needed to sort through the emotions and the physical trauma that I had been through, that I would take my passion for writing and performing and I would turn it into a greater purpose. So I wrote my debut memoir, Deep Dark Blue, a memoir of survival, about my time at the Air Force Academy and my childhood. And I wrote it for myself as a catharsis to get through everything that I had gone through and make sense of it and see where I was in the world and take responsibility for who I am and how I felt and what I had gone through in narrowly surviving the Air Force Academy. But I sought to get it published so that anybody who has lost a loved one, gone through bullying or trauma or divorce or assault, violence of any kind, would have something to let them know that they are not alone. And had I had it when I was going through all of that, I would have truly appreciated it. So my family is philanthropically oriented, and sometimes it's not until you face trauma and tragedy of your own that you really understand that that philanthropic spirit is the thing that beats all of our hearts. It's that rhythm that is universal and that we can feel in others. And it's that thing into which we can tap to really feel connected and to really do what we set on this planet to do, which is have relationships that are deep and profound and meaningful with people that you love, that you've never met, that you're just meeting now. We all have our story. And I know deep down that there is nothing that we can go through that could take our joy. No one can take our joy without our consent. So if we know that other people, that we're not alone and that other people have gone through something similar, then that's your portal to really connect with those people. And philanthropy, of course, is not just about giving money, as beautifully said. It's not just about giving time. It's about really tapping in to the beat of everybody's heart. And now I'm an actor and a writer in New York City, and I get to connect with people every single day and hear their story and really foster and cultivate what lights them up and connect at this place at which we're all one.
Thank you, thank you. When people talk about their moms, they cry. And I want to give a shout out to your mom. Beautiful resilience and way to heal from the trauma. Thank you. And I guess I will throw out a question to you, and that's how you made some significant changes in your life at a time when you were going through tremendous trauma and truly paralyzing kind of trauma. So how did you begin to heal yourself and how does that play out in your philanthropy and your efforts today?
I think that trauma, difficulty, struggle is the biggest change agent for us. So it only makes sense that I would make a 180-degree change in my life in the midst of trying to heal from it. But when I left the Air Force Academy, I really had the chance, because I had no other option, of really taking a look inside and asking the questions, first of all, who am I now? Mm-hmm. What will I let define me? What do I want? What do I want to do now, having no expectation for the future? My, plan A has been ripped away. So what was I going to make my plan A? And for me personally, the study of human behavior and what makes people tick to go into the FBI as a profiler is the exact same study method that you use for acting. It just has a friendlier outcome. A more sustainable career life if you take your work home with you. And so in that way, my desires and my profound desire to connect with people has never changed. It just wears different clothes. Mm-hmm. And being able to be a trustee on our family foundation, Ari Old's foundation, has been an incredible outlet to be able to not only galvanize the members of our board, but to truly go into the community and work with other foundations and have an outlet and a vehicle for things that I'm passionate about. Mm-hmm. Because I truly believe it's our personal passion that we do for ourselves. And once we turn that outward and allow other people to take part in it, you're really turning that into a purpose that's greater than yourself.
So can you tell me what some of that funding that you're passionate about has gone to?
Sure. We're mostly program-based in the Michigan, the regional area of Lansing. Women's shelters, children, education hugely. I know myself, I've given to organizations like RAIN to help sexual assault. And ironically, darkly ironically, the Me Too movement came just as my book was coming out. So here we have this beautiful space that's opened up within our nation, certainly, to actually have the conversations that victims have not had the courage or space to have.
Right.
So here we have this beautiful platform now for not only our foundation to give, but for me to devote time and resources. And then everybody that we meet, you meet people whose passion it is for something that is indicative of their life and their struggle and their story, and there's always overlap without fail.
And then Lee, kind of a similar question, but in the community, I mean, you're experiencing kind of your own trauma in your friends and family that have lost their homes and their sense of security and your childhood home. And I'm sure there's this period of really being personally deeply affected. And then at what point do you start to balance the immediacy of what's happening with kind of looking more long term? I mean, I love that you call it now, you're in the resilience phase.
Well, so for me personally, after Hurricane Ike, I wasn't, like I mentioned, I wasn't in a position to do anything. We didn't have a foundation. I didn't have money to give. I didn't live on the island, and I didn't go there very often. Every 2 years or so to see my grandfather. And I remember driving around. We visited my grandfather about 2 months after Hurricane Ike, and I remember driving around with my husband, and I thought I was prepared. I thought, like, I'm gonna be totally good. I've seen all the pictures for the last 2 months. Like, I'll be fine. And he was just driving around and he doesn't know the city very well. And he's like, you have to stop crying and tell me where to drive. And I'm like, but I can't, and like every place we went, I was just like, so then, they rebuilt and did things. And then in 2012, when my grandfather died and we started running this foundation, then I had the opportunity to go to Galveston much more often and learn about things, learn what they had done since Ike. And then when Hurricane Harvey happened, like I said, I jumped right in. But they had already started sort of the conversation on resiliency. And one of the things that we're doing collectively, all the foundations in town, and we also partner with the United Way. They are the fiscal agent for the Galveston County Recovery Fund. And then another fund that we're doing, which 2 years ago, we all went to Detroit. It's the George and Cynthia Mitchell Foundation, which is based in Houston, but they have a Galveston portion of their funding that needs to go to Galveston. And so they've been doing these learning journeys, and they had this trip to Detroit planned to learn about the Detroit Future City. A lot of you from Michigan probably know about Detroit, but the Detroit Future City plan and what they've done in recent years to respond to the challenges that they have had, which are very different from a hurricane situation, but still quite challenging. And at that point, on that trip, and they invited all of the foundations in Galveston to go, and on that trip, we all sort of said, hey, we need to really sit down and collaborate, and we need to do certain things for the future of Galveston. And so we started having this conversation about what a future Galveston looks like and how the foundations can fund this effort. And we had members of the city council and also he's not the city planner, but he's in charge of the development office at the city. And he was on that trip. And so we knew we had city buy-in from the beginning, and we have a great mayor right now who is very much supportive of this planning process. And so at that point, that was April of 2017, so we really started collaborating. We had been meeting like once a quarter and just learning about different issues in Galveston, but at that Detroit trip, that's when we all kind of said organically, like, okay, what do we need to do? We need to get this type of thing going in Galveston, because with that, a big piece of it being the resiliency, being how do we mitigate maybe flood damage from hurricanes in the future. There's talk of building a big dike. There's, but how do we do that? If we do that, what's the environmental impact? We have lots of wetlands and over 300 different species of birds or something on the island. And so we have to be, cognizant of those issues. We also, the main industry is tourism, and you don't want to impact that. So we started talking at that point, just sort of seeing what they were doing, what they had done in Detroit over the last 8 years or so, and really had a conversation. And so we had all these meetings, and then Hurricane Harvey happened. So we were already sort of really working closely together, already talking about those resiliency issues, just knowing, like I said earlier, another hurricane's gonna come and we've gotta do something about it or try to mitigate what happens.
Can I speak a little bit to the resiliency piece?
Please.
I know with the work I do, when I first started writing the book, I remember I was with my photographer, and when I found that when I interviewed people, or like the work that you guys do, you take on the trauma, you hold it, right? The energy. So I would interview somebody, and they're telling me about this so horribly tragic story, and their trauma, I would sort of absorb some of it. And I found it to be like burdensome, and I was happy to hold it, but at the same time, I was like, this isn't going to work long term. And I think that all of us who do this kind of work and we're motivated through trauma, it's important to take care of ourselves. And so my photographer, we were talking to a woman whose daughter was killed at Columbine High School, and she was explaining how she was needing to, it had been 4 years, and she needed to go through her athletic t-shirts and figure out what to do with them. And so we're listening to this, and we get in the car to drive away, and I'm just like so sad, and I just could feel her sadness just in me. And I said to my photographer, this great woman that I love, I said, I just need a minute. And I pulled over to the side of the road, and we just cried. And I found it was so important. And every time I do an interview, I'm interviewing this guy, right, whose son, 8-year-old, accidentally killed his 5-year-old little brother after finding the mom's gun. And I get done with the interview, and I go and I find a place, and I cry. And I just let some of this energy out. And I think it's really important that we find places and we find processes to be able to continue doing the work. Because if we just, and Polo, like your tragedy, it's like it was constantly coming at you and you're re-experiencing it. And so finding ways and encouraging others that are doing the type of work to find ways to protect ourselves and to not be crushed by all the stuff that we're doing.
I think, if you don't mind me, what you're saying is everything. Because I believe we can only help others as much as we've helped ourselves, as much as we know how to help ourselves. And unless our relationship is facile and open and moving, and our willingness to look inside and to really be honest with how you feel and what you've gone through and how you feel about yourself having gone through this, unless your relationship with yourself is easy and facile and you can hold space for your emotions and to release them through laughter or through crying, then your ability to do that for somebody else, especially on a larger scale, is going to be inhibited greatly. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is absolutely everything. Taking care, it's selfish, but in the best way. It's selfish in being oriented to yourself in terms of taking care of yourself, doing everything that you can, that you know what it takes to make you feel good, whether it's as trivial as a mani-pedi or getting involved in a team or a fantasy baseball league or whatever your outlet is, knowing that and being willing to give yourself time and space to actually do that. Because if you are not healthy then and whole in and of yourself, there's no way that you can be that for somebody else who needs to rent that space from you, that emotional space to alleviate theirs. So it's huge. Taking care of yourself is everything.
And for me, you said with your husband earlier, he gets angry. I get angry. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't write a check because I have 4 other people that I have to talk to about writing the check. But I am like, I'll go to these meetings and I'm like, okay, what's happening, guys? And since I don't live in Galveston, one good thing, and one it is, you had asked me earlier how often I go, and it's been for the last 2 years, it's been once a month. And which is great for me. It's my hometown, it's where I grew up, it feeds my soul. I live on the beach in California right now, but that beach is different. It's my beach, and it smells different, and it speaks to my soul. And so it's, for me personally, being able to go and physically do the work and make sure, kind of poke along the people that do live there, right. Which they can sometimes get a little complacent. They're like, oh, this is too hard. We've got our daily lives to do. And I'm like, no, like, we got to keep moving. And so, but yeah, so I get angry. I don't, other than the crying after the hurricane, I get angry.
I've given up on Kleenex, actually. Some of you know that I had a tragic death in my family, and Kleenex was just not, I walked around with a washcloth. That was so much more efficient.
Resilient.
Yeah. So I guess to all of you, before we open it up to the audience for questions, what advice do you have for others that are going through similar experiences with trauma and then channeling some of the energy behind that into philanthropy?
One thing that I've found is a lot of people, there's so many shootings, and there's such an opportunity for people to become activated. So the Parkland kids, for instance, right? It hasn't even been a year yet. And they're out there and they're giving their voice. And I think that's really important, and that I think that can help create change. But I've seen a lot of activists come in and they have huge traumas, huge loss, and they come into the gun violence prevention world. And they do it in a way that's replacing the grief that they need to feel. I have a friend who, her daughter was killed in a mass shooting, and she sold her house a few months after. She bought an RV, and she and her husband travel from shooting to help. And I think it's amazing that she does this, but I'm very aware that she's like delayed the grief process. And she's literally never at home, and she can't experience that. And so I really worry for her mental health, because she hasn't stopped to really say, this sucks, and I'm so sad. And we can't bypass the grieving process and all the facets of it. And so that's my advice, is like, let yourself experience in the way you need to, so that then you can help others.
Thank you.
I think that's so beautifully put. There is no life hack for grief, you know?
Yeah, that's a
the
good point,
only
yeah.
way
I love that.
is through. And so often we don't allow ourselves time to truly feel. And we didn't come here to just be happy or one note of an emotion. We came here to experience the full range of human emotion. We're human. This is our gift of being human, is our ability to truly feel the full spectrum that we've been allotted. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to stay or wallow at one end or the other, but to truly know what it takes through doing it, of what moves you up that emotional scale. And the first step in going through anything is knowing and realizing on a visceral level, on a cellular level, that you are not alone. And our awareness, and everybody else who has people that they know and love and connects with people in their lives, helps another realize that they are not alone. They don't have to be family members. They can just be a friendly face that they see at work every day that shows up, somebody who's integrated and connected in themselves to really connect and make eye contact. And then to really have the ability to put your hand over your heart and take deep breaths and ask yourself how you feel, and be honest enough to hear the answer, and stay and actually answer the question out loud. How do you feel? And you'll start to align yourself, your mind and your heart, and the chatter goes away for all the social chatter or the expectations that you feel as a person, and you'll really start to align yourself and who you are, and be okay with it. And from that position, you can go anywhere in life. And you can go anywhere and you're still at home. You can go anywhere and you can feel connected to that oneness that connects us all. And I know it sounds really airy-fairy and frou-frou, but but it makes all the difference in terms of when you go to have a relationship with a person. And especially if you go into a traumatic situation and you're there to help. If you're not grounded and connected in yourself, then you are just delaying your ability to truly stop and get rooted and feel, so that you can be of service.
I'll start just for a moment. Because we're still relatively new and figuring this out, when my grandfather set up the foundation, he didn't talk to us about it at all. So we didn't really know anything about it until he passed away. And so we were sort of thrown into, okay, now you're trustees and you've got this and you have to give this money away. And so we were like, well, And so we aren't quite there yet. We're basically we give money to nonprofits in the South Texas area that someone feels passionate about, or they've got a cool program that we're interested in. But we are, particularly my sister and I, are having more of a conversation about perhaps carving out a piece to focus on capacity building, or there is, I want to say, in Texas, an organization that helps fund sabbaticals for nonprofit leaders. And I remember hearing about them. I don't know all the information, but that was something my sister and I were like, well, that could be interesting to get into, but we're not there yet. And part of that is because of the other trustees and things. So, but we are looking at that, and we're also looking a lot more at impact investing and seeing where that can go too. So.
I love that, and I love the orientation, the perspective from which you come. I think it's important. I'm a new trustee on our family foundation as well, given that I'm 5th generation and my cousin and I are fifth. Oh, very cool. It's nice to have a legacy and a playbook, sort of, for what you are stewarding for the next generation. I think for us, we're a relatively small family foundation. We're the oldest in Michigan, but we're relatively small. So our biggest thing in terms of the how is to keep huge lines of communication open within the community of givers, so that we can pair up and truly exponentially multiply our power in terms of giving. Communication is huge. My mom is incredible at that, spearheading our foundation in terms of relationship with the community and other foundations, so that we can come together and make more of a difference. But it also allows us to have a communal conversation, so that, hey, do you know anything about this nonprofit? How do they do things? What's important to them? Where are they coming from? What is their POV in terms of supporting causes like what you say? It's huge to be able to have that conversation and to really have a living, breathing organism with which to work and to sort of foster and cultivate. So it's coming.
Please join me in thanking Polo, Heidi, and Lee. Thank you, ladies.